And looks like we're live on YouTube. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in issue 492 in the NPM RFC's repo. We asked, as usual, that folks please abide by the code of conduct, that these calls and all comms are essentially asked to, sorry, I apologize. We ask you to abide by the code of conduct we reference here in the agenda. The synopsis there is just please be mindful and respectful of each other as folks are talking. Please raise your hand if you have a comment and we'll call on you. Want to quickly give the floor for folks if there's any announcements that people had. Feel free to raise your hand or let us know if anything comes to mind. We have a small agenda today. There's only 2 RFCs and then a few updates. So we may have some time at the end to add topics if folks want to, and or we can end early and give some folks time back. But yeah, just quickly wanted to jump into the first item we had here, PR 488. This is the make install scripts opt-in. Francisco, I think that's how you say your name. Did you want to maybe just do a quick introduction, and then you could just quickly speak to this, and as noted, we can actually go deeper into this next week if you want. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of mentioned in the comment. So I mean, the RFC itself is just hopefully starting a discussion around the feasibility and what it would look like to not have install scripts be the kind of just default action of typing npm install. Happy to, if people want to talk about stuff now, totally fine. I mentioned in a comment that I would love to kind of just punt the discussion until next week, just because a lot of people had a lot of good ideas and stuff, and I wanted to make sure those ideas were incorporated in the actual RFC. But additionally, we've kind of started over here a bunch of processes that take several days to complete, where we're just trying to gather a bunch of data. I would love to be able to say exactly this many packages use the pre-prepared script. And if it's a small number, then being able to be these are actually the use cases or something, right? Versus for example, the post install script, which gets used a lot more, and they fall into these buckets and stuff. And in general, kind of if nothing other than us having a really concrete idea of what the usages of these kind of things look like, I just think that would inform just future discussions about why people want these things, what it means to be able to replace that behavior in a world where we want to get rid of some of the behavior, etc. So that's kind of what I would ideally like to have to be able to present kind of next week.
Yeah, what I'll say on that just quickly before I go to you, Bradley, is that we're also doing something similar, or I've actually asked some teams whether or not they have insights or analysis like that on usage by dependencies, and just to see what the breadth of a change like this would who would be impacted, and what are the use cases that we currently have. Bradley, I'll let you speak, and I think also Miles had a note that you want to make as well. So,
yeah, so I'm working at Datadog, and we have pre-built binaries for everything usually. So we did some fiddling around after seeing this RFC, and we noticed npm does run arbitrary commands if you have a binding.jip, for example, and a few other situations that are not in the package JSON. So the first thing we did, because we don't normally install using those commands, they're there as fallbacks for things like FreeBSD, where we don't supply a pre-built binary, is we took out scripts, the whole field from our package JSON. And we noticed compilation errors because we generally are running in environments without compilers. And so this RFC definitely needs to grow in scope because there are certain behaviors of arbitrary code execution that are not in the package JSON. And it needs to identify that. The other thing we noted was a lot of the RFC is centered around the person adding a package in their workflow, and there's not much about cross-computer synchronization yet, and preventing, a maintenance burden being on everybody consuming a package, everybody who has to maintain and publish packages multiple times over. And so it'd be good to add more perspective to the RFC on those two things. And that's what we had from Datadog.
That's great context. Thanks, Bradley. Did anybody else want to chime in? You can also go ahead, Lance.
I have a couple thoughts on this. So, to be frank, I've flip-flopped a bunch this week on what I think is the best long-term strategy regarding scripts. And to be honest, it's something that I've flip-flopped on for many, many years. I think that we could come and enumerate a very long list of things that the client does dynamically via scripts that would benefit from being done statically as much as possible. And a great example of that is some of the really cool work that I've seen coming out of the ES Build team, who is using optional dependencies and per platform published modules as a way to distribute native modules that doesn't require install scripts and doesn't require stuff like Node pre-jip and doesn't require gathering dependencies from kind of a third party that doesn't have reliability or verified SHA sums or versioning. And there's a ton of great things that we get from taking these dynamic things and making them static. I have two big concerns with a change that is as large as this. And the first is kind of a DX and adoption concern. We saw a bit of this kind of pattern when we did the big changes around peer depths, for example. And there was a lot of discussion around what is the best course of action for enforcing peer depths. And before NPM 7 launched, we actually were far stricter about the fail cases, but it broke so many workflows that we were concerned that it would essentially result in folks just not being able to upgrade their clients. And so we introduced some escape hatches, -- force. And then we were like, well, some of the things we're doing in force, we could actually maybe do automatically for people. But anyways, I won't get too much into that, but more just that that level of breakage needs to be very thoughtful. And there is the concern that if you go too far on breaking, that people don't upgrade their clients, so you don't have the desired effect because people refuse to upgrade. And the other problem is that people blanket opt out. And this is a problem that we've discussed extensively also about NPM audit. If people feel like NPM audit is too noisy and they just decide to completely opt out, then the entire purpose of that solution is kind of missed. And so I could see a world, I'm not saying this is the world, but I could see a world where we introduce a change like this, and then basically every single NPM tutorial from all the big companies, all the big projects like React or Angular or whatever, kind of start with the first thing you should do is change this setting to make sure that things will actually install. And to be clear, this isn't a reason not to do it, but this is a reason to be really thoughtful about the way that we make changes and to be really careful about kind of how we move the needle. And if possible, to do it in kind of small, consumable, measurable improvements rather than kind of one hard sweep of just disabling things. The second concern that I have, which to be clear, I'm not entirely convinced of, but I'm still kind of working through it, is I've heard the term security theater thrown around a little bit, in that if a module itself has been compromised and the script is now malicious, well, if we disable the use of the scripts, yes, we lower the threshold and the attack surface and the number of packages that like kind of immediately get compromised, but we don't totally solve it because, you know, a sufficiently clever attacker who's planning an attack, if they know, for example, that if you load React, a hot path always gets to like this code path, can inject code in that hot path. And if the attack that we're thinking of is, you know, install crypto miners in CI/CD or install password installers on desktops, it's just it's kicking the can down the road, for lack of a better way of putting it. And to be clear, it's not perfect is never a good reason not to do anything. But I think that in light of what a large ecosystem DX breaking change this would be, I think that is an important thing to keep in mind as we're thinking through the solution space. And so to clarify kind of all of those statements at once, the intent is not to shut down discussion. The intent is not to say that we shouldn't do this at all. It is mostly to say we need to be very careful. We need to be very thoughtful. And if there are ways that we can think about this in a phased approach that takes steps towards improving the status quo to get us towards that goal, I think that we'll have much more success in significantly improving the security of the registry. And I think that if we did it in one fell swoop, we would not accomplish the goals that we're after right now in protecting the ecosystem.
Bradley, did you want to?
Yeah, so security theater is an interesting thing. So if we do want to make kind of a threat model on this exact feature, we can do that. In particular, I have concerns about people just calling out security theater without having a model for what they're talking about. In particular, one of the nice things that we talk about is shipping pre-built binaries onto, you know, the client's computer, so they don't have to have a compilation tool chain, or they don't have to take the time to compile it, don't have to execute arbitrary shell commands, basically. But in order to do so, you still execute those commands somewhere, generally in some CI server, realistically. And so discussion, really, when we want to talk about what is being secured, we need to just identify, you know, what this does affect, what's practical about it. Like, it's not practical to have a read-only file system on your build server, but it usually is fairly practical to have a read-only file system on, you know, a development production deployment. Usually that works out okay. So this is a good case where you have an attack like the event stream attack. We have historical data on it. It did the attack at runtime. It wasn't using an install script. It kind of undid its attack afterward and all this. And it wouldn't be affected by this ignore scripts thing, but other attacks that we have on record would be prevented by it. So whenever we get to this, I think just enumerating what they mean by its security theater, they need to back up what they think security is.
Go ahead, Isaac, and then Francisco, is that how you say it? Sorry, apologies. Great.
Yeah, so just kind of jumping on this, like the security angle, I feel like it does, you know, as Bradley points out, like it does reduce or at least change the security attack surface if we don't run install scripts by default. But I'm actually, you know, because of like the event, you know, because of the fact that we're still going to be running code, like you can ship a pure JavaScript module. If I can take over a popular pure JavaScript module, I can just put some code that goes at runtime, and I know at some point you're going to require it, and that code will be run. That's why it's there in the tree in the first place. So if you know, it does prevent taking over a machine at install time, but it doesn't really prevent taking over a machine, period. That's still reducing the attack surface. I don't know exactly how meaningfully it's reducing the attack surface. For me, I feel like I don't know if I would go so far as to say it's security theater. It would certainly be theatrical if we said, well, now that we don't run install scripts anymore, NPM is 100% secure and you can trust everything. Like, yeah, okay, well, but if you take over an account, you can still ship malicious JavaScript code. It just can't be malicious build time code. The thing that's much more interesting to me is actually the kind of angle that Bradley you initially touched on with how we're handling and sort of the workarounds and hacks that people have put together, some of which are very clever and kind of sophisticated. We've seen Next.js also doing some creative stuff where they're sort of sniffing the using optional dependencies and then actually sniffing the build tool chain, so they can have a different build depending on what's available in like which header files are available even. And that's, I think that's actually a really interesting angle to explore as a way to deliver something like a, what was the variance, like something like a variance type of feature where, your ideal tree still includes these 12 different optional dependencies, but only one of them will actually be reified by NPM based on your particular machine setup. So things like that might be really interesting to explore. And I think that we're going to run into some issues with, the clever but somewhat surprising default of like, well, if you don't have a scripts.post install, but you do have a Node.js file, then we just sort of, you have a binding.js file. We go, oh, hey, this is a Node.js project, I better build it. So there's kind of like there's what is explicitly written in the package.json file, and then there's what is the package manifest that we load from a folder that contains a package.json as well as other files. And those two things are not 100% the same. It is still deterministic, but it's not like necessarily exactly what you have in package.json. So I think the big thing to consider is really just like, what is the impact to the community if we said, and I haven't really analyzed this RFC in detail, so I apologize if anything that I'm saying has already been addressed, but we really need to look at like, what are the things we're going to break if we make install scripts opt-in. The second thing is, what exactly is that opt-in mechanism? I frequently see people suggest like, well, for a given package and version, I should be able to say, yes, this is safe, and just don't ever prompt me about that particular package and version again, like add it to an allow list, which could be good. But on the other hand, we have, you have the issue with like SSH logins where you just say yes the first time you see it, and most people never even look at it, or certainly don't go out of band and check the key like you're quote unquote supposed to. So if that's the case, if it's easy to just say yes or yes to all, then people are going to do that, and there's not really any security benefit for that feature. And if people don't say yes to it, then we've made it even more kind of onerous. So it's like the easier we make it, the lower the more we reduce the cost, but then also the lower we reduce the benefit. So that's about it. I'm sorry, I'm bringing up kind of more problems than solutions, but I feel like this is kind of the stage that this is at. And where I'd really like to explore is just the, how we can, and maybe out of band for this RFC, but how we can get a little smarter with our defaults around when we run Node.js and when we just say, hey, there's a pre-built thing here, I don't need to rebuild it.
Yeah, go ahead, Francisco.
Sorry, ahead of time, I was raising my hand manually and wasn't aware of the metaverse version of hand raising. So I just wanted to some of these are kind of statements, but just pretend there's question marks at the end because like I'm kind of asking to, because just want to know the best way to. There's like a lot of information that's been like lost in the comments and like they can be put into the RFC, but you know, I think one of the kind of fundamental issues here is that there are like a lot of stakeholders, and you know, I want to set expectations for the RFC, like specifically, hey, this is a set of problems we're trying to solve. We agree there's other problems, but like this is the bar we're trying to reach. And an example of that, I think, is like, I think it's very easy since, I mean, I suffer from this, and since I'm isomorphic, right? I run the same code in the back end as the front end. I immediately jump to this conclusion of like, well, yeah, you can just put the code in the package and it's going to get run. But then I remember, oh, everyone who actually has Ruby backends and Python backends, the only chance that the npm package ever has to run on their computers usually is the install script, right? Because like their tests usually run in Puppeteer, so they're in that sandbox. And so there actually is, for like this huge part of the community that like often doesn't get represented in the comments, just because like they, like to them npm is this fringe thing, it's like for the front end people, but that like actually opens up this attack surface of their computers in an environment where they would never expect, right? Like if you're only using JavaScript in the browser, by default, your intuition is that like the attack surface is like, oh, how are they potentially messing with the cookies of my users or something like that. You would not, I think, intuitively expect the possibility of something taking your keys in your CI machine, because again, again, just by intuition, your expectation is that this code is only ever running in a sandbox browser environment. Why would it run, you know, on your main machine? You know, and a separate like attack surface that I've actually, you know, I don't think I've ever been attacked, but like I've certainly had it happen to me, is I'll just like mistype the name of a thing, you know, like npm install lodash with 2 H's. And if you have people squatting on that, on those, you know, typo names, they can just fork a process immediately. You can't control C fast enough. And like, go check activity monitor if you misspell the name, like who knows what's running there, right? Like, so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's this like multi-dimensional thing where like, you know, the motivation section of the RFC should be like, well, there's all these different stakeholders, and then like, you know, there's, you know, different usage cases and so forth. So I'm not sure the best way to present that, but like, I want to just acknowledge that like, yeah, in certain use cases, it feels like this is the least of my concerns. Whereas for other use cases, it seems like it's almost basically the only attack surface that's presented. I also wanted to touch on this kind of like thing that's been talked about a bit of like, well, what are the alternatives that we should give people? And I put some of this in the RFC, but I actually think that might just be the most interesting part of this. And like, you know, perhaps it's worth filling out the RFC substantially more. I didn't want to like completely like fill it up with just like, here's a bunch of wacky ideas for how to do this stuff separately. But I agree that like the correct way to do this is not with a big switch. Like in my mind, this is like, you know, this is the theme of a set of changes that take place over the course of time, where like the shared goal is to be at a place where it feels very reasonable to remove this, right? And like, I think a great example is like, you know, npm added the like funding, you know, package JSON field. I thus no longer feel a ton of sympathy for that use case, right? Like it's like, there's an official way to do it. It works with this really nifty npm fund command, etc. Can we do that with like, you know, most of the, you know, big part of the, and you know, of the tail, and like you're now leaving like fairly esoteric cases. And I think if we can do that, because the other thing that I don't want to be conveyed in this, I think a lot of people see this and interpret it as like, no install scripts, and that's not the point of this. It's, in an ideal world, I think install scripts would be exceptional, would require exceptional, you know, interaction. And like, if we can get to a point where that's not just a dream, but like a reality, then I think, you know, it's not that unacceptable to be like, yeah, you're installing a really weird package and it requires this weird flag, and that's okay, right? I guess the other kind of thing, just in terms of like goals or like usages or something, is I think, at least to me, one big success metric would be if there could be some sort of commit history around the change from something is running on your computer or something is not running to something is running, right? Like currently that's not the case just due to the nature of Semver ranges and, the fact that GitHub by default will just hide, large package lock JSON changes. So like, even though it is technically true that like a lot of, malicious stuff could be snuck into a mainline package, it's a lot easier to sneak a version bump into a package lock, to a packet, or even sneak a new package into a package lock file that everyone's eyes just glaze over and they don't look at that part of the PR, right? So in a world where like the kind of explicitness of like, hey, we are explicitly allowing these scripts to run gets kind of percolated up to the package.json file, and there's like perhaps like every single thing that you initially enable with the flag gets recorded in the package JSON. Then when someone submits a PR like that, necessarily needs a script, it like kind of yells at you in the actual commit history or whatever, right? It's not like a silent side effect of a seemingly unrelated change. Just wanted to give a thumbs up to the Node.js thing too. We also run into so at RunKit, we actually npm install every single package. And so we quickly had to kind of find out that, oh, we thought that we had gotten them all. No, I guess there's other ways. I am curious. So the last two things are questions. I'll just leave it after that. Aside from reading the code, is there a place where it is completely documented what the exhaustive list of things that cause code to run on your computer are? That's kind of my first question that I want to leave. And then my second question is, I had so far been operating on the kind of assumption that I'm trying really hard to come up with solutions that don't require backend or registry changes. My intuition is just that makes it a lot easier to both be approved and have community support. Obviously, since we don't have access to internal code or whatever. If npm feels like there are certainly a lot more interesting things that can be done on the back, the floodgates kind of open on possibilities. If all of a sudden you can do analysis on the back end or add new features, again, if there was an official support for multiple different versions of binaries or whatever, and it's not a thing that we have to figure out on the side, that certainly changes the dynamics of the proposal. However, I'm still leaning towards how much can we do just in the client? So yeah, those are my kind of two questions to leave.
Make sure if you're following along in the meeting notes, I'm trying to do my best to capture everything as you're saying it. Would be good to capture the exactly how you want to state those two, I think, questions. One is, can we help try to find all the use cases, or like you said, an exhaustive list of use cases for install scripts today would be great. And then I think that you have the scope correct in that, this forum is trying to figure out what the CLI can do independent of, let's say, registry features. And I think that's the right scope to keep these RFCs too, since that's something that we can actually affect. And I think that, yeah, that's the right lens to be approaching this problem set. I don't know who was first, but Caleb, maybe you can speak. I see your hands up, and then Miles.
Howdy. I think the best thing that you could do for this RFC is to add a appendix with data about the number of packages that will run scripts and the analysis for what kind of scripts they run. And then in addition to using the data to justify if it's safe or what impact it would have to disable running scripts, we'd also be able to try to classify what people are doing. I'd love to see that data. Another thing I noticed is that the RFC is written suggesting that we would ignore scripts or just disable running scripts, and I'd be interested in failing if it has a script and you haven't allowed it to run a script, because a package could be installed in a non-functional manner if you just ignore a script. And I think, at least for DX, it makes sense to say this package has a script. You've chosen not to run it. and then fail and require users to allow list it.
I'm with you, Caleb, on the research. We've been talking about what kind of research we could do internally. Another bit of research that I'd really love to do is explore a handful of the top workflows and like projects that people use. So we were kind of enumerating, Francisco, you were doing a great job of enumerating, like, some people are using this in like Ruby, and like they're never even running in Node. And there's some people who are using React Native. There's some people who are using Electron. There's web apps, there's desktop apps, there's CLI apps, there's like functions, there's edge, like there's so many different runtimes and targets that folks are trying to accomplish things. And if we think about like, what are some of those top workflows and what are some of those top tools? Like we already have ignore scripts that you could do. What of those workflows do we break today? Which ecosystems would we like? I always like to think about JavaScript and NPM as like an ecosystem of ecosystems. So, well, it may be like 90% of things are unaffected by this, but we like completely break the React Native ecosystem, for example. Like that is, that's bad. And again, it doesn't mean that we like need to move forward on the scripts, but it's just like another form of research and notes that we could bring together that I think would be helpful. The other bit here regarding the scripts that I think would be useful, and I think my brain forgot about it because there's so many things going on here. Give me just a half second to reboot and see if I can defrag my brain and find the thing I was looking for. I'm stalling, as you could tell. No, it's gone. So I'll let you. I'll let you respond, and then if it comes back, in like 5 minutes, which likely will, I'll let you know.
Sure. I just want to take 1 minute, and then Francisco will give you the floor. Just I noted in the chat as you were speaking before about one nugget that came out, or recommendation that you came out about knowing potentially when a package has changed, or let's say introduced install scripts. And there is a flag right now that we do define specifically in the sort of truncated version of documents, which is package documents, or how we refer to essentially the registry docs. So that Corgi doc actually provides a flag today for each individual package, whether or not it has some scripts, like some lifecycle scripts defined, which could be used potentially as an indicator in the future for whether or not an unexpected change is being introduced between, let's say, a patch or a minor version of a dependency, which might be a good indicator or flag that you don't trust that thing anymore, or that trust has changed potentially, let's say. But that's just, I want to bring that note up because you noted something in that space, and there is at least some information that we have about that that we could use today. Mouse, did you want to?
Yeah, you jogged my memory. Thank you. So the other thing that I was thinking about here, we've talked about threat model a couple times here, which I think is really important. One of the conversations that we've been having internally about like the various ways that we can protect the ecosystem, protect people from, like installing compromised packages, essentially. So I think that like you identified one case, which is definitely one we need to keep our eyes out for, which are like net new packages that are typo squatting high profile packages. And without getting too much into the specifics of it, we actually do this today. So try to publish some packages with names that are very similar to top packages, and you won't be able to. Now there's a threshold, and we're still in the process of like defining and fine tuning that threshold, but we're kind of thinking about this idea of like high impact projects, and essentially like once it gets past that threshold, there's some additional things that we have in place. And I mentioned that because realistically, I'm not saying 100% of the time, but we see a lot of malware published to the registry. And in general, when people report malware, if it's a package that has 0 downloads or less than 10 downloads and no dependents, the odds of that compromising computers is extremely low. And so like we have an SLA as to like how long we take to respond to these kinds of reports. I think it's like 48 or 72 hours or something like that. I'd have to check into it. And this is like internal SLAs for the different teams that manage it. But it's like we don't consider these things to be high risk they're a risk, we need to clean it up, but like the odds of them compromising people are fairly low. So realistically, and feel free to push back or disagree, the cohort of packages that we're concerned about here are highly distributed, highly downloaded packages that are compromised with malicious code that is using the scripts as an injection point to take over or do malicious deeds. The reason why I mention this is like there's definitely things that we could do at a registry level as well to have signals to better identify these types of scenarios. Like for what we suggested was, hey, maybe if there's a change in the has scripts bit on an extremely highly downloaded package, well, maybe we don't promote that immediately. And we send an email to the maintainers to say, hey, did you mean to publish this? Is this you who actually did this? I'm not advocating for that as a solution, but I more mean that like, I think enumerating this problem space and also thinking about what are the cases that we're specifically trying to protect against, that there's other solutions that we can come up as well that may be less disruptive, that have the same kind of like net results in the end of kind of protecting people from being compromised, especially if we think that we're really only dealing with a cohort of, you know, like highly dependent on, highly installed packages being compromised. That's very different than all install scripts on every package.
So just wanted to give the floor to Francisco, then Bradley. If we could also time box this a bit, because we have a couple other items. And we also noted that we want to go more deep next week into this, but obviously it's a good discussion. So feel free to go, Francisco.
Yeah, so just wanted to say I definitely agree on the like the point that was made a while ago of like it should fail and not like just silently ignore scripts. I'm sorry that the RFC reads that way. That the intention was like, in my mind, again, in the CI case, it's like your test failed, like because the install failed, like because you know some script didn't get run. I wanted to also just in the spirit of this, like how do you make this like not be one big switch or something, like it would be one way to think of this is kind of like ignore scripts plus. I know I'm kind of just contradicting myself since like you actually want it to fail, but like I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the unfortunate things about ignore scripts is that it is just a yes, no. Like if we could quickly push out, and by quickly I just mean faster than doing the real, you know, everyone's affected by default change. Like it might take a year, but like a thing where like people are empowered to essentially say, pretend like I want default off with the ability to piecemeal turn on. I think that would certainly help kind of this, you know, be a more active investigation of like, well, how often can people actually start using it in this way without it breaking their stuff? Because I think right now, just with ignore scripts, the threshold is artificially high as to how many things break because they're turning everything off, not just some things. And I had actually one registry question slash request maybe in terms of this. Oh, actually two things, but sorry, let me say one thing, then I'm gonna make my registry thing. The framing of this has all been security. I don't know whether it's worth to mention. There's been a lot of people that have become interested for non-security reasons. Like I know Vercel is very interested in the fact that, you know, a set of packages that is, you know, more declarative, both surfaces a lot more interesting information, right? Like you just start querying for more interest, like how many people want funding, as opposed to, you know, like the old way of doing things where it's like you're trying to solve the halting problem of figuring out what scripts are actually asking for funding or whatever. But additionally, it does lead to like a significantly more cacheability just because, you know, everything is going through kind of the NPM happy path. So just wanted to bring that up. I don't know. I'm happy to leave that completely out of the RC in the discussion, but there are people who have, you know, surprisingly become interested in this for non-security reasons. And then my kind of registry question slash request is, perhaps it's like a legacy or technical thing. And also for the record, maybe this has changed, or at least the last time I checked. It's always seemed to me like the best behavior for like kind of package names and scopes would be that you should get to own both from the beginning, not open up the possibility of like, I register a package name. I don't know that I'm going to want a bunch of like, you know, satellite packages. And then when I go later to get the scope name, someone else has already taken it. So like there's kind of just a fundamental expectations mismatch for users in that like literally the same name can be owned by two different parties. And I think the implication when you see like Babel and @Babel is that they have the same trust mechanics, right? But that's not the case as far as I know currently. And I understand that there's probably like a big legacy problem of like, well, what about all the kind of like existing packages and scopes that are already owned by different people? But I would certainly be really interested in like kind of a from now on, when you register a package, you should just get the scope, right? Like it seems like asking for trouble to let someone else get the scope later, or to let you get the scope and not the package, if that makes sense.
For sure. I think that's definitely like outside of the scope of where we can potentially provide any kind of like insight into that, a policy change like that, but we can take that back internally and discuss with our peers in the registry team about a policy change like that. Because it does sound like pretty sensible. Bradley, I want to give you a floor, and then I was hoping we could get some
It'll be
updates.
short.
Okay.
So one thing to note, when you're only concerned with popular packages, one of the problems is on developer machines, you have less popular packages sometimes. They're different from deployed packages. So one of the attacks that I've seen in the past is you actually attack the developer machine, which is the most likely place that you do want to run your actual install scripts. So I don't think popular packages are the only thing you need to protect here. I think the scariest attacks are going to be on developer machines. So, yeah, that's it.
For sure.
Also, popular meaning downloads. If it's only been downloaded once, there's, you know, at most one developer machine that could potentially be compromised. If it gets downloaded a million times a week, then even from the point of view of compromising dev machines, it's a bigger.
Yeah,
that's not true, especially on the MIME packages. If you go and look around at them, some of them have extremely low downloads, and then they're bundled in other packages.
I think also
Then they run.
Yeah, we can't quantify impact either. So if that one download was from a like CI machine inside of a very large organization that then, you know, distributes other software or something, like the impact of that one download could still be significant, right? So it, yeah, very interesting, like to consider, but cool. I just wanted to quickly move off this and note that we will leave this on the agenda for next week as well, since it ate a lot of time here, and encourage everybody to continue to discuss this async, potentially in the RFC thread itself, and appreciate any analysis and surfacing data, like when folks are finding it, I think is great. I know I'll try to be doing the same, and that we've poked a few teams at least on our side to like investigate, you know, the use cases for install scripts and what people are doing today. So want to move on to the other item we had here, registry, resolving registry overrides. So Caleb, if you want to quickly go into this, I know we didn't really spend a lot of time on it last week.
Sure. So the core idea is that at Amazon, we use different custom registries, and we'll build the same package against multiple different registries. Currently, lock files have a behavior where if they use the default registry, it's a magic value that is always resolved as the currently configured registry. But if your lock file references a different registry, you can't switch to a new custom registry and install from using that registry. I'm proposing a couple of different options that will change the way that NPM behaves. One of them will just write out lock files without a resolved key, so that you'll always use your currently configured registry. There's another option which affects installing packages with shrink wraps, which is actually a change we've observed in NPM 7. Prior to NPM 7, it appears that the resolve key was always ignored, but after 7, the resolve key will be used, which has caused install failures on our network isolated hosts for packages with shrink wraps that reference like yarn package registry. Another option there is to ignore the resolve key when you're reading shrink wrap files from packages that you're trying to install. There hasn't been much activity on this RFC since last week. I don't know if that means no one's interested in it or if it would be rejected if I started implementing this. So I'd like some feedback, but go ahead if this is something that you guys would consider.
Yeah, I apologize. I haven't looked into this enough myself since last week. I'm not sure anybody from our team has. I'm not sure, Isaac, have you looked at this or anybody else?
I have very briefly. I kind of read through it. It has been a thorny problem for a very, very long time. The fact that registry.npmjs.org is kind of like this magic string. We sort of attempted to make it at least explicitly magical by putting like, curly brace registry, close curly brace in there, but then that broke npm 6 when it tried to use those same log files. So we ended up having to kind of roll that back. I think that the thing to do here, I'm not confident. I kind of, like I said, I read through the RFC. I'm not really confident to comment on it and say whether it's, necessarily the right solution approach or not. But it did strike me that this is a pretty good explanation of like a use case that is not being well handled right now. And that's, the ideal place to start for sure.
Francis,
so
go ahead.
Currently, we have some custom build tools which will attempt to clean the package lock after an install, or really any modification to the package lock. They just delete the resolve key. And that's working pretty well for us, but it does cause problems when people don't use those tools. So if somebody runs npm update, now they have a lock file that has these resolves. It'd be nice if we could bundle it into the CLI itself.
Francisco, did you want to go?
Yeah, just a question. So I'm trying to like read it really quick, but maybe so we're certainly interested in kind of registry resolution stuff. So just wanted to say at least one, like I'm definitely think it's worthwhile. I'm curious if this is specifically about kind of like switching registries after the fact, or if it would allow kind of like package by package registry options, which I think is kind of hard now. But again, it's been a little while since I've thought about this, so apologies if this is has a well-known solution or something, and I'm derailing the conversation at all.
This RFC doesn't really address package by package registries. I know that that's currently supported as long as they're scoped. Like I know that you can select different registries for different scope packages. I don't know what effect that has on the package lock though.
So I can't like override, like if for whatever reason I've only cached these in my private registry, I can't like just 0.3, something like that at something else.
No, not without assigning them to a scope.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean the use case that we're really kind of optimized for is for your internal registry to be a pass-through proxy, caching proxy at least, so that anything that can be fetched from the public registry could be fetched from your internal registry, which seems to be a very, at least a fairly common approach to solving this at a lot of companies we've talked to. That works with the resolve values on registry.npmjs.org, assuming that your internal registry is set up in such a way that it's a forward proxy, and also assuming that you set the like -- registry equals config value to that internal registry, and then you kind of, it says, oh well, this resolve value is registry.npmjs.org, but I'm actually looking at a different registry right now, so I'm going to fetch it from there instead, using the same URL path. But it's, like I said, it's thorny and it's sticky, and it's like a lot of kind of weird hidden magic that is in place to support npm 6 and 5 and 6. So it's definitely in need of a refresh. If not now in npm 8, then certainly something we need to kind of carefully consider for npm 9, since that'll be a bigger breaking change anyhow.
So both the current behavior and like a placeholder token like square bracket registry assume that the path is the same on both registries, which is usually not a problem. But like in our case, our private registries don't host tarballs at the same path. It would work for like 2 different instances of our private registries, but it may not work for switching from the default registry to one of our private registries.
Right. So you have to actually fetch the package, look at the dis.tarball field and sort of re-resolve it. What we, maybe the other downside of this approach of just saying throw out the resolve field, which is working, it's working, but it's adding a considerable number of extra HTTP requests. Now, in your case, those extra requests are necessary because you don't have the correct data. So better to make those extra short, small JSON requests than try to fetch a tarball, get a 404, or crash your whole build. But I wonder if there's a way that we could like only, kind of only penalize you for this need that you have, but let everybody else continue to benefit from cutting that extra couple of round trips.
Yeah. So one of the alternates that I proposed was another configuration option for recording a registry. So with this existing magic behavior for the default registry, we only have a problem when we generate the lock file while we're using a custom registry, because the lock file references that custom registry, which doesn't have this magic behavior. If there was an option to specify the registry to record in the lock file, which could be different than the registry you're using, then we could end up writing out a lock file that's transferable. And it's basically the same behavior as if we wrote out a special sigil like brackets registry, but it would be transferable back to npm 6.
Right. We could also leave the kind of backwards compatible section of the lock file in place. We encountered this like magic behavior, this magic string behavior prior to biting the bullet and making lock file v2, right? We're still trying to make it work without a bump to the lock file version. Within that dependencies, or within that, gosh, I forget now which one is which. Within the packages section of the lock file, we're much more flexible, right? We only have to worry about backwards compatibility to npm 7. And so if we just stop putting the resolve field there and start putting some other field that is, a little bit more like explicit and a little bit more clear that like, hey, this is where we got it from, but this wasn't the default registry, or this was the registry we were using at the time. So if you switch registries, you have to re-resolve it. There's probably some interesting solutions we could explore there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In terms of action items here, do you want to give a green light to explore some of this to Caleb? It sounds like you have some time to even potentially work on an implementation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Maybe we can get somebody to pair with you from our team, or even like for an hour-long session or something like that to look into this. Let's queue that up, I think, just to investigate this further, so we actually make something happen here.
Yeah, it's certainly not a waste of time to explore solutions in this area, even if it's not something we end up landing on for breaking other use case reasons. It's still worthwhile.
Okay.
So let's take that away and try to set up a call with somebody from our team and you, Caleb, if you got time in the next week or so.
That works for me.
Cool. Awesome. I want to give the last 5 minutes some time to the other 2 RFCs that we've had open for a while now. I just followed up, I know today, on the running prepare scripts for linked Deps to connect Matt with Michael Perrott, who used to be on our team, who said he could help with moving that forward. I'm not sure if you have any other updates there, Matt, that you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, no updates on the RFC itself. I do think I've made some progress on this sort of like hacky solution, or the manual solution of like just sort of hard coding the coordination of running pack and prepare on linked bundled dependencies. And I think this is something that came up maybe in one of the previous meetings. It doesn't work deeper than one level. So like if I set up the prepare script, so like if A depends on B and B depends on C, I've gotten so far as to orchestrate it so that when I pack A, it includes the linked bundled B, but linked bundled B doesn't include its linked bundled C, if that makes sense. Even though B is packed in the same way that that A is.
Okay. Is there?
Yeah, we don't have to like fix this right
Yeah.
now. I could I'll definitely take the introduction and reach out to Mike and try to make some noise in one of the Slacks this week.
Can you make a simple, like, I'm not sure if you've already done this, but make a simple like use case or test case project that we could be looking at?
Yes. I
yeah,
think I
that'd be-
have done that, and I think I probably have like an even simpler version of that I could put up.
Just so that we can like poke at it, play with it collaboratively even. And yeah, cool. That'd be really helpful. And yeah, apologize, it took a while, but hopefully you and Mike can work on that. Got you set up there. So Isaac, did you want to give any update to the PR 375 dependency outlining of what's shared amongst workspaces?
Yeah, I think that's still pending some more kind of meeting of the minds between Jordan and me. I think where we left it was, hey, this is a good step. It doesn't go as far as anybody would really like, but it also has basically no downsides. Let's go ahead and do it. I have a hack together sort of working implementation. The next step of it, to sort of do it as almost like a pseudo isolated mode, like a isolated mode light for workspaces, is definitely a little bit more involved. I don't have any implementation on that, but it's also relatively straightforward. So we just kind of need to hash out exactly how that's supposed to work, and probably have either a follow-up or an update to this RFC.
Okay. Is that something that you folks are going to get together in the next week? Is there like a call you can set up between you two, maybe?
Maybe next week.
Yeah, probably next week.
Okay. Need any help figuring out schedules, or can you two take that away? And
You know how to talk to each other.
Yeah.
you know how to get a hold of each other. I've seen you talk quite a bit in Slack before. Okay, that'd be great though if you can find some dedicated time even over the next week just to hash things out. I think would be really helpful. I know Jordan said he hates writing RFCs, so
I apparently love it. I write them sometimes just to throw them away. It's
right. Yeah,
it's a
I've
sick
seen that
hobby,
happen.
but
Yeah.
it's a weird hobby, but
Okay. I know we're at time, so I appreciate everybody jumping on today. Apologize if we didn't get to something that you wanted to discuss, but definitely appreciate any discussion that can be had async between now and next week. And we'll probably keep most of the items that were on today's agenda for next week as well, in case you didn't get to comment on something. But yeah, I appreciate everybody jumping on today, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.
Later.